The listing had been up for 6 weeks when he called. I remember because I'd just refilled the coffee pot and the realtor was already texting me about lowering the price again. October in Atlanta, that stretch where it's still warm at noon and then cold by 7, and everything about the apartment made me tired. The empty half of the closet, the scratch on the kitchen floor from when we moved the fridge in 8 years ago. I wanted it gone. I wanted somebody else's problem. He said his name was Walter on the phone, voice like a man who used to smoke and stopped a long time ago. He asked if he could see it that afternoon, and I said sure, 4 o'clock, and he thanked me twice before hanging up. Something about the way he thanked me twice. The building is off Ponce, one of those older places from the 70s with the balconies that stick out over the parking lot. 3 floors, no elevator. When Walter came up the stairs, I could hear him stop on the landing to catch his breath, and I opened the door before he knocked because I felt bad standing there listening. He was maybe 70, tall once, hunched now. Windbreaker, khakis, one of those Braves caps that had faded from red to almost pink. He shook my hand and his palm was very dry. "Thanks for letting me come by on short notice," he said. I told him it was no trouble, and I meant it. I'd had maybe 4 showings in 6 weeks. A young couple who spent the whole time looking at their phones. A guy from Ohio who kept asking about the water pressure. Walter didn't ask about anything. He just walked in and stood in the entryway for a long moment, looking at the wall where the hallway opened out to the living room. I started my little tour speech, the one my realtor made me practice, hardwood original, HVAC replaced in 2019, new dishwasher last spring, and he nodded along politely, but he wasn't really listening. He was looking past me. In the living room, he stopped by the window and put his hand flat on the frame, not tapping it, not testing it, just resting his hand there like you'd rest it on a dog's back. "It was nice here once," he said. I laughed a little, the way you do when you're not sure if something's a joke. "I hope it's still nice." "I'm trying to sell it." He turned and smiled at me, and it was a real smile, warm but tired in the corners. "No, I mean, I lived here a long time ago." I remember the coffee cup in my hand felt heavier for a second. I asked him when, and he said 2001 to 2003, him and his wife. They'd rented it, then bought it from the landlord when the building went condo, then sold it in the spring of '03 when she got the job in Charlotte. "I saw the listing on Zillow last night," he said. "I wasn't looking, it just came up. My daughter has me on some kind of alert for the neighborhood, I think. I didn't know it was for sale until I saw the pictures and thought, that's my kitchen." I didn't know what to say to that. I told him to look around, take his time. I stayed by the counter and pretended to check my phone. He was in there about 40 minutes. I could hear him moving from room to room, slow, sometimes stopping for a while. Once I heard him say something under his breath in the hallway, and I couldn't tell if it was to me or to himself, so I didn't answer. When he came back to the kitchen, he had his cap in his hands. "I'm not going to buy it," he said. "I hope that's all right." I don't know why I came, honestly. I just wanted to see it. I told him it was fine. I told him I understood. I don't think I did then, but I said it. He asked if he could show me a few things before he left, and I said yes. He walked me through the apartment like it was his. Not proud, not sad, just factual. In the second bedroom, he pointed at the closet door and said his wife had marked their nephew's height on the inside of it every summer, and the last mark was from 2002, and I should look for it under the paint. I checked later. It was there. 5 faint pencil lines, painted over maybe 3 or 4 times, still just visible if you knew to look. In the hallway, he stopped at a spot on the wall about waist high and said, "This is where the phone used to hang. When we moved in, there was still a jack." I looked and there was no jack, no outline, nothing. But he tapped the spot like he was greeting an old friend. The last place he showed me was the balcony. It's small, concrete floor, black railing, room for maybe 2 chairs if you're friendly. I'd put a folding chair out there and a clay pot in the corner by the drain, and that was it. The pot had been there when I moved in with my ex in 2014. I never planted anything. I never moved it. It just sat there full of old dirt and one dry stick that I'd stopped seeing years ago. Walter looked at the pot for a long time. "Our cat died out here," he said. In the summer of 2002, she was 15. She liked to lie in the sun on this floor, and one afternoon, she just didn't get up. I said I was sorry. My wife wanted to plant something. Marigolds, I think. She said it wasn't a grave exactly, but it was something. He nodded at the pot. That's the pot. We left it when we moved. I didn't think anybody would keep it. I looked at the pot. The clay was faded almost white on the side that faced the sun. There was a small chip in the rim I'd never noticed. Old dirt, packed hard, the stick tilted a little to one side. I hadn't moved it in 8 years. My ex hadn't moved it. Whoever lived here between Walter and us hadn't moved it either, I guess, or they had, and then put it back exactly where it was. I didn't say any of that. I just stood there with him and looked at the pot. After a minute, he put his cap back on and thanked me and said he'd let himself out. He shook my hand again at the door. His palm was still very dry. I watched from the window as he crossed the parking lot to a silver Camry. He got in slowly. He sat there a while before he puled out. I sold the apartment about a month later. A couple from Marietta, their first place. They asked if I was leaving any furniture, and I said no, but there's a pot on the balcony, and if you don't want it, you can throw it out. It's fine. They said they'd figure it out. I moved my stuff on a Saturday in November. I did one last walkthrough after the movers left, just to check the closets. Everything was empty. The apartment sounded different, empty than I expected, softer, like it had been holding its breath for me and could finally let go. On my way out, I stepped onto the balcony one more time. The pot was where it had always been. I thought about taking it. I stood there with my hand on the rim, and the clay was cold, and I could feel the little chip against my thumb. I left it. I don't know if the couple from Marietta kept it, or if it's still out there, or if somebody finally threw it away. I've driven past the building twice since then. I never looked up. The funeral was on a Thursday in the middle of October, and Nashville was doing that thing it does in fall, where the mornings are cold enough to see your breath, but by noon, you're peeling off your jacket. Dale had been my coworker for 6 years. Cancer took him fast, 3 months from diagnosis to done, and we all still felt raw about it. There were maybe 20 of us at Mount Olivet, his wife Marlene, their 2 grown kids, a few cousins, and then the rest of us from the office. Small group, the kind of funeral where everybody has already met everybody at some Christmas party or retirement thing. I'd been to Dale's house for cookouts. I knew who his brother was. I knew the neighbor who always came to those things because he did smoked ribs on Saturdays. So when I saw the man standing about 20 feet off from the rest of us, near a tree, I noticed him right away. He was maybe 60, gray hair combed back, dark suit that fit him well, but looked old. Not shabby, just old, the way a suit gets when you only wear it for weddings and funerals. He had his hands folded in front of him, and he was looking at the casket the whole time. Not at the pastor, not at Marlene, at the casket. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured he was somebody's uncle, a cousin from out of state, a friend from Dale's church that I hadn't met. Nashville's a big enough town that Dale could have had a whole life I didn't know about. The service was short. Dale hadn't wanted a long one. The pastor read the 23rd Psalm. One of Dale's brothers spoke, and then Marlene said a few words that broke about halfway through, and she just stood there for a bit before sitting down. It was cold enough that when people cried, you could see it in the air. The man by the tree cried too. I looked over at one point, and his shoulders were shaking. He wasn't making any noise. He had a handkerchief pressed to his face, a real cloth one, not tissues, and his whole body was folded in on itself the way people fold when the grief is bigger than they expected. I felt bad for looking. I turned back to the pastor. After they lowered the casket, people started drifting toward their cars. There was going to be food back at Marlene's place, sandwiches and casseroles the neighbors had brought. I was walking toward the row where I'd parked when I saw the man again, standing at the grave alone. He was saying something. I couldn't hear what. I don't know why I did it. I walked over. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red and swollen, and he had that trembling under the jaw that older men get when they're trying not to cry in front of a stranger. "Thank you," he said. His voice was thicker than I expected, like he'd been holding it in for hours. "How did you know Dale?" He was quiet for a second. He looked back at the grave and then at me, and he gave this little smile that wasn't really a smile. "A long time ago," he said. I waited. He didn't add anything. "Are you coming back to the house?" I asked. "Marlene's got food." "No," he said. "No, I don't think that would be right." He said it soft, almost to himself. Then he thanked me again and turned and walked toward the road. I watched him go for a few steps, and then I got distracted because Rebecca from accounting called my name from across the row, waving me over so we could carpool. By the time I looked back at the road, he was gone. No car pulling away, no figure walking, just gone. But there's a bend in the road there and a whole line of tall cedars, and I told myself he must have gotten to his car quick. At Marlene's, I asked around, casually at first, then less casually when nobody had an answer. Older guy, gray hair, dark blue suit, was standing off by himself over by the tree. Rebecca hadn't noticed him. Jim from the warehouse thought maybe he was a cousin. Dale's actual cousin, when I asked, had no idea who I was describing. One of the church ladies said she'd seen him, but assumed he was with us from the office. Nobody knew him, not one person out of 20. I let it go for the rest of the day. I ate a ham sandwich, hugged Marlene, told her to call if she needed anything, drove home, poured a glass of wine, sat on my back porch, and watched a squirrel dig through the leaves and thought about it. Here's the thing that stuck with me. He wasn't a wanderer. He wasn't some drifter who showed up for the free food, or a cemetery regular who cries at every service. Those people exist, I've heard about them, but this man knew Dale. You could see it. Whatever that grief was, it had a name attached to it, and the name was Dale. I called Marlene about a week later. I hadn't planned to bring it up. I was calling to check in and to see if she need help going through Dale's clothes, which was a thing she'd mentioned at the funeral. We talked for a while, and eventually I said, kind of offhand, "Hey, there was a man at the service I didn't recognize. Older guy, gray hair. Nobody at your place seemed to know him. I was curious." The line went quiet. "Marlene, can you describe him again?" she said. I did. The suit, the handkerchief, the way he stood apart, the way he wouldn't come to the house. She started crying. Not the way she'd cried at the funeral. This was different, sharper, like something had been knocked loose in her chest. "Marlene, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "No," she said. "No, honey, it's okay. I know who that was." She told me the story in pieces, stopping to breathe. His name was Ray. He and Dale had been best friends from the time they were kids in East Nashville, grew up 2 blocks apart, went to the same schools, stood up in each other's weddings. Marlene said Ray was the godfather of their oldest, technically, though nobody had used that word in a very long time. 20 years ago, they'd had a fight. Marlene didn't know the details, or said she didn't. Something about money, or something about a woman one of them had dated, or maybe both. Dale had come home one night and said he was done with Ray. Just done. And whatever Ray had done or said, Dale never spoke to him again. Not once in 20 years. Marlene said she'd tried, in the early years, to get him to make it right. Dale wouldn't. He must have seen the obituary, she said, or somebody at the old neighborhood told him. I don't know how he found out. He drove all the way out there and stood by a tree, I said. He didn't want to make it about him. We sat on the phone, not saying anything for a bit. I could hear her breathing. "Do you want to find him?" I asked. "I could ask around. Somebody's got to know where he lives." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "No," she finally said. "No, I don't think so." Then she said, "But I'm glad he came. I've thought about that phone call a lot." Ray drove to Mount Olivet on a cold Thursday to bury a man who hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. He stood by a tree so nobody would ask him to leave. He cried into a handkerchief, and he didn't come to the house because he knew it wasn't his place. And then he went home, wherever home was, and he kept whatever he'd been carrying for 20 years to himself. I don't know what they fought about. I don't think Marlene really does either, but somewhere in this city, there's an old man in a dark blue suit who lost his best friend twice. Once when they stopped talking, and once when the ground opened up at Mount Olivet. And I kept thinking he probably went home that day and made a cup of coffee and sat in a chair by the window and didn't tell a single soul where he'd been. The walk from the village to my cabin was 15 minutes through pine wads, and I'd done it maybe 400 times by that September. Never once had I heard the forest go quiet the way it did that night. I'd stayed later than usual at the Millers. Their daughter Cass had turned 9 and there was cake, and by the time I hugged everyone and pulled on my jacket, it was past 10. The village is small, just a cluster of houses along a road with no name if you ask the state, and my place sits at the end of a hunting trail that cuts through about a half-mile of white pine and hemlock. I'd walked it in every season, snow, rain, black fly summer, the whole thing. My headlamp was in my coat pocket, like always. Outside the Miller's porch light, the air smelled like wood smoke and wet ground. Somewhere down the road, a dog was barking, and I remember the crickets were loud that night. That whole late summer hum you get in Maine before the first hard frost, the one that sounds like the woods are breathing. I clicked on my headlamp and stepped past the tree line. The first 100 yards were normal. Crickets, the little tick-tick of something moving in the leaves off to my left, a barred owl caling from somewhere deeper in. I remember thinking about the cake, whether I'd taken the slice Cass wrapped in a napkin for me, pating my pocket, finding it. Small stuff. My boots on the pine needles made that soft, familiar sound. Then, all at once, everything stopped. I don't mean it faded. I don't mean the crickets got quieter or the owl moved off. I mean I took one step and the woods were alive, and I took the next step and they weren't. Every insect, every frog down by the little creek that runs parallel to the trail. The wind in the pines, which had been steady, dropped like someone had closed a door. I stopped walking. That was my first mistake, probably, because the second my boots weren't crunching, the silence got bigger. I could hear my own jacket move when I breathed. I could hear the blood in my ears. Nothing else, not one thing else. I've lived in this part of Maine my whole life. I know what a quiet woods sounds like. A quiet woods still has something, a branch creaking, a squirrel resettling, wind. This wasn't quiet. This was the woods holding its breath. I turned my head slow and swept the headlamp beam around. Pine trunks, black spaces between them, the trail curving off ahead where I couldn't quite see, nothing moving, no eye shine. The beam only reaches about 30 feet before it dies against the trees, and everything past that was solid dark. Okay, I thought. Coyote maybe. There's a pack that dens up near the old logging cut about a mile north, and sometimes when they move through, the little stuff shuts up. That made sense. I actually said it out loud, quiet. Just coyotes. And hearing my own voice in that silence was worse than the silence. It sounded flat, like the trees were eating it. I started walking again, faster. The trail bends left after about 4 minutes and drops down toward the creek crossing, and normally you hear the water before you see it. That night, I didn't hear the water until I was standing on the little plank bridge, and even then, it was wrong, muffled, like it was under a blanket. I don't know how to describe it better than that. Water can't be quiet. Water is water, but the whole soundscape of the woods had been turned down to almost nothing, and my brain kept trying to make sense of it and failing. Halfway across the bridge, I heard something in the trees to my right. Not a sound, exactly. A shift, the way you can feel someone standing behind you at a bus stop even if they haven't moved. Weight is the word I keep coming back to. There was weight in the woods to my right that hadn't been there a minute before. I didn't shine the light that direction. I know that sounds stupid. Every part of me wanted to. But there's a thing my dad told me when I was a kid, when we used to hunt, and it was that if you don't know what's there, sometimes it's better not to lock eyes with it. He was talking about not spooking deer, I think. That night on the bridge, standing there with my headlamp pointed straight down at the wet planks, I was not thinking about dare. I kept the beam low and I walked. not ran. Some part of me had decided, without asking the rest of me, that running would be the thing that made it start. The trail climbs a little after the creek, and there's a stretch, maybe 200 yards, where the pines get thick on both sides and the canopy closes in over you. In daylight, it's my favorite part. That night, it was the longest 200 yards of my life. The silence stayed with me. It stayed exactly with me. When I sped up, it sped up. When I slowed down for a second, because a root caught my boot, I could feel it slow down too, whatever it was, in the trees on my right, keeping pace, not closer, not farther. I started counting my steps to keep my head from going somewhere bad. Got to 60, lost count, started again. My mouth was dry in a way I'd never felt before, like all the water in me had moved somewhere it could be more useful. My hands inside my pockets were shaking hard enough that the wrapped slice of cake was making a little sound against the fabric, and I remember being embarrassed about it, like whatever was out there could hear the cake shaking. I saw my porch light through the trees before I heard anything change, just a little yellow blur through the trunks, and then the shape of my cabin, and then the last bend in the trail. When I stepped out of the trees into my own yard, the crickets came back, not gradually, all at once, like a switch. The pines started moving in the wind again. Somewhere the owl called, farther off than before. I made it inside and locked the door and stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything, just standing. When I checked my phone, the walk had taken 8 minutes. 8, not 15. I'd been almost running without knowing it. In the morning, I called Rita next door because I couldn't help it. I needed to say it out loud to someone. Before I could get to the woods part, she said, "Oh hun, did you hear? Ranger came by yesterday. So Black Bear and 2 cubs been moving through the ridge. Told everybody to stay off the trail after dark till they push north." She said it the way you'd say the mail came late. Just information. She said the bear was probably why the Sullivans' garbage bin got knocked over, and that Cass had sent tracks by the creek 2 days before her birthday, and nobody had thought to mention it to me. A bear with cubs. That's why the woods went quiet. Bears that size move through, and everything little just stops. Waits her out, doesn't want to draw attention. Rita said it happens all the time up here, perfectly normal, a completely ordinary reason for what I'd walked through. I said thanks and hung up and made coffee, and my hand was steady, and I told myself all the way through the first cup that a bear was a good answer. Bears aren't looking for you, bears want the garbage. Bears with cubs will run you off, sure, but they aren't hunting. It's a good answer. I've held on to it. I hold on to it every time I have to walk that trail now, which is most days, because I still live out here, and the village is still 15 minutes through the pines. The answer works fine in the daytime. At night, when I'm on the bridge and the water sounds muffled and the weight moves through the trees to my right at exactly my pace, the answer doesn't do much. I know what it was. I do. But knowing what a thing is and being alone with it in the dark are not the same thing. And anyone who tells you they are has never stood on a plank bridge in a Maine pine woods with all the sound gone out of the world.